Alex, welcome to the Optimal Performance Podcast.
Thank you very much, Sean. Excited to be here.
We're like I promised just moments ago, we're going to go provocative. We're going to hold no punches. We're going to be really straightforward because those are the funnest conversations and the most, entertaining pieces of content. If you could just start by giving your sort of bio, what you've done, where you are, and then we'll dive right into my wacky questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up in California, I wanted to be a professional baseball player, as many kids did. And I worked very hard, was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to Vanderbilt University. And maybe the first and second most important things I learned as a SEC baseball player were that looks matter and that humans are primal. Why that matters after I've been out of pro baseball now for over 15 years is I used this observation that I first made in my marketing and finance classes that basically people who are good looking, wear suits well, and speak well have insane advantages, almost unfair advantages in the workplace. I used this observation to elevator pitch my way into Google to get a job offer from a hedge fund, even though I had no experience in formal finance. I used these shortcuts to realize that if I can stay in shape through my 20s, people will always bet on a high energy, well-spoken young man to make them money. And what I found over the multi-year journey that I had working as a Google employee, working as a hedge fund employee, was that I was able to get insanely ripped, insanely jacked, insanely tan without counting calories, without going hungry, eating a diet that was predominantly pizza, burgers, fried chicken, tacos, all while making more money, working fewer hours effectively year after year until I finally broke free from my corporate job. And so I look back to my experience as a college and pro athlete, and I'm very, very thankful because it forced me to develop mental models that allow me to take shortcuts to be highly efficient with my time, cut corners that other people don't realize you can cut, and ultimately be successful in a highly competitive world because I'm playing a game that most people can't even envision. And it's easy to win when you're competing against yourself.
Polished. I love it. You've done this before, obviously, and you're the proof is in the pudding. Look good, speak well, be clear. Give us an example of one of those mental models.
The most important mental model that I teach my clients is the Kingpin mental model. And I say Kingpin because most people are familiar with bowling. When you're bowling, you don't actually hit 10 pins with your bowling ball. You try to hit one that knocks out other pins. And so if you were to try to create a checklist for a successful person to be successful, you say, okay, well, I wake up in the morning, maybe I drink coffee, I work out, I answer emails, I hop on the phone with clients, I go through some pitches, I coach other people, I try to interact with my audience, go on podcasts. It's just so many things that I need to do, so many things that my clients need to do, that it feels overwhelming. It's so overwhelming that oftentimes people skip the first step and feel, okay, well, I don't even have time to make it to the gym today. And I'm just going to eat the food that's convenient for me because I don't have time to plan ahead. But when you think about what makes winning most feasible, winning is most feasible when you have high energy. In fact, I think energy is the new money. I would rather have energy than money because I can make money with energy a lot easier than I can make energy with money. And so if you prioritize sleep, prioritize quality sleep, and prioritize the gym, it doesn't need to be hours a day, 45 minutes, an hour, a few times a week. You're going to have more energy that will make it easier for you to sustain an effective diet, which is going to give you more energy to kick ass in your job and the way you make money. You're going to end up making more money, which is going to enable you to buy higher quality food. It's going to enable you to live in better areas where you're encircled by more people with more money. And so the number one kingpin that most people are missing from their lives is creating a professional life where health and fitness are the foundation, no matter how busy you think you are.
Yeah. I always say that enthusiasm matters more than just about everything. If you have an enthusiasm for any given topic, if you can speak to it at length, if you have enthusiasm for your life, for your family, for the work that you're doing, everybody notices. It shines so brightly. You don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. You don't even have to be the most talented or the most skilled. But if you have enthusiasm everybody around you understands that. They see it, and it raises their level as well. And this is the same for sports. This is the same for your career, your church, your communities that you're involved in. Like if you have enthusiasm, you have a massive upper hand.
Humans are first and foremost primates.
Yeah,
And
right.
so sorry to cut you off, but humans are first and foremost primates. And so people are going to make heuristic assessments based on you, based on what you say. And so most high energy people have a way about going through life that works, whether it necessarily maps to scientifically testable logic or not always the case. But humans are trained to recognize confidence, to recognize to recognize energy. They're recognized to follow people who other people follow. And so if you realize that if you have high energy and you're charismatic, it's ultimately going to be much easier for you to have leverage, both with your family and with your organization. And by leverage, I mean your actions will be replicated throughout your organizations that you lead. You're going to be a much more effective leader when you bring energy to the table every single day, almost such that whatever it is you need to do to increase your energy will almost certainly result in better output with less input.
Yeah, I love it. What a strong start. When I did a little bit of research on you and watched some of your clips, it's intuitive. It makes sense, right? It's sort of universal truths that just about everybody can kind of grok immediately, and it's tough to disagree with you. I was trying to look and see because I like fringe opinions, and it's just knowledge bomb after knowledge bomb after knowledge bomb. I really enjoyed your conversation with Zuby, who's somebody who I really appreciate the work that he does, and I know that you guys are close. Gaming the human condition. This is a biohacking podcast. This is a performance optimization podcast. And so I'd love for you to just briefly sort of highlight what you mean by gaming the human condition.
We, especially as men, have to play games that we can win. Ultimately, we as humans are designed to conserve energy. And so it's almost worse to try something and fail than to not try at all. Because when you try and fail, you train yourself to believe that your effort doesn't matter, especially if you fail over and over again. And so one thing that I think is essential for everybody is to make sure that when they structure their day, a certain portion of it comes with highly predictable dopamine, realistically from the gym. And so if you're an entrepreneur, you run a business unit, you know that you might work hard and not get much from it by the end of the day, by the end of the week, by the end of the month, quarter, or year. You know, if you lead a family, you can put a lot of work in, and hey, your kid gets sick, has some problems at school, your wife isn't the happiest as she's been in your relationship, and there's not always something that you can do that is going to generate predictable yield. What this does for a lot of people is predictably, it teaches them to have learned helplessness. And when you have learned helplessness, whether it's through your relationship with your family, your relationship with your job, your relationship with the outside world, what your mind ultimately points you to is energy conservation. You learn that your effort doesn't matter. You will subconsciously learn to restrict your effort. And within a few quarters, you're in a funk and you don't realize why. And so the way that I hedged this when I was working at Google and when I was working at the cryptocurrency exchange that I was working at before becoming a full-time entrepreneur is I structured morning workouts 4 or 5 mornings per week. Number one, so I could get ripped, but number two, so I could have a mental advantage where I would always have the pattern in my mind that my input resulted in positive output. Because if you start your day knowing that you knocked out 2 miles or 3 miles, or you knocked out HIIT intervals, or you knocked out a lift, and most of the people that you work with or interface with did not, you feel like you started your day with a win. You remind yourself before 9 a.m. that you are a winner. And a lot of success is simply figuring out ways to stay in the game. And the easiest way to stay in the game is to create a narrative about why your effort continues to matter and why it justifies subsequent effort. You need to realize that if you can create a dopamine loop that convinces you to invest more effort after more effort, that's how you become addicted to winning. And the people who are addicted to winning tend to be very good at multiple things in their life, not just one.
Yeah. Dopamine, we are starved. We're not starved for it. We're overexposed, and social media screens as a whole undermines that sort of natural dopamine loop that you're talking about. If you spend the first 15 minutes of your day on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok, you're stealing dopamine that you need to do the things that you want to do in that day, just to your exact same point. And I couldn't help but also notice that, if you're getting up and working out first thing, you're also taking advantage of the testosterone that's available when it's at its peak that lasts for the rest of the day. It's just like I love this because those ideas are sort of meta skills, meta habits that affect everything. You look good, you feel good, you play good, the doing hard work feels good, and that just builds and builds and builds over time. And the fastest way to undermine that dopamine loop so that you can keep creating that for yourself is screens. It's porn. It's Twitter, right?
Yep. It's exogenous dopamine. So, you said earlier, you thought you misspoke when you said that we're starved for dopamine. What we are starved for, and I think you'd agree with, is internally produced endogenous dopamine. And the reason we're starved for endogenous dopamine is just like any other hormone or neurochemical. If you take something exogenously, if you take testosterone exogenously, your body will naturally produce less testosterone. If you take dopamine exogenously, your body will naturally produce or naturally seek less endogenous dopamine. And so if you're getting your dopamine from porn, from food, which is very common, from drugs, alcohol, YouTube, Instagram, you're going to become lazy because it's easier to get dopamine from exogenous sources than it is to get dopamine from endogenous sources, self-produced dopamine. But ultimately, if you want to be free, you have to understand that the entire world, the entire modern world, was designed to get you addicted to dopamine that a third party provides you. Whether that's dopamine that you get from getting promoted at your job, dopamine that you get from scrolling someone else's app so they can monetize you. If you're dependent on somebody else giving you dopamine, that's your drug dealer, and you're an addict, you're a slave to that person. But once you can break free and once you become dependent on dopamine that you can produce for yourself, only then can you become an independent person who is in control of your own destiny.
Yeah, I can't help but think about sort of this Ayn Randian, producer versus consumer, right? Like if you are nothing but consuming food, consuming media, consuming, etc., you're right. You're on the hook for all of that stuff, and it's not easy to stop. It's not easy to wean yourself off of that stuff. It's convenient, it's fast acting, and you're stuck consuming. Most of the time, I think for most people, when we talk all about sleep and media cleanliness and screen, stuff like that, most people are doing it right until the very moment where they try to go to sleep. They're blasting themselves with blue light until either on a TV in their bedroom or a cell phone in their hand, and then they turn that off and they close their eyes and try to go to sleep. Well, no, you've not created any melatonin. You're not ready to sleep. You haven't done the things that are part of like really good sleep hygiene, versus a producer who produces things, builds things, collaborates, creates content, creates new ideas, builds things in business, does things with their family, creates experiences for their loved ones. And I don't know, it's just, I feel like there's a really obvious connection between some of these old ideas, and Ayn Rand was like nailed it a long time ago. And it's even more true today now with the prevalence of technology that just like steals your loosh.
If you're not raised or at the very least mentored or coached by a producer, the entire world is designed to make you a consumer. Because guess what? More people will profit off of consumers than they will profit off of producers. So the entire education system, all the 5 hours per day that the average American will watch TV or has watched TV prior to the emergence of smartphones, the multiple hours more that the average American is spending on their screen every day, all of that trains you to be dependent on somebody else. I've often said that the path to slavery is downhill. If you don't course correct and you simply go with the flow, by the time you're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, your life will be headed downhill to a path of slavery. And something needs to click with you, whether you're in your 20s, whether you're in your 30s, or even in your 40s, that says, hey, you know what? I'm going to regain control. I'm going to grab the bull by the horns, and I'm not going to be subject to someone else's game. Very few people have this within them. Very few people can withstand the multi-year journey that it is to regain your own sovereignty, because it's almost like taking an animal out of the zoo and putting it in the wild when it hasn't developed the skills to hunt on its own. It's only developed the skills to placate the master that gives it food on regularly scheduled intervals. The world is completely different for producers. The world is completely different when you do not have a guaranteed paycheck, when you do not have guaranteed exogenous dopamine. But I can guarantee you, from my personal experience and from the experience of those whom I've worked with, it is 100% worth it for those who take the journey.
Yeah. For people that you've worked with or anecdotally, what's that point at which, is there like a clear point at which people are pulling back their sovereignty, the control of their life, making headway in progress? Screens are one thing, but exercise is another, nutrition, fulfilling relationships. Is there a point that you've noticed over your lifetime where people get that light bulb moment where they're like, and their mind shifts from that sort of consumer to producer? What is that? What's usually marked by? Is that like going from a waist 40 to a waist 38? Like what do you think are the indicators that people are like, oh shit, this is how I want to be now?
Usually it is fast self-sourced dopamine, and that can come in a couple forms. Number one, body changes. Definitely a way to give people fast source dopamine. Hey, my belt is tighter, is looser now than it was 2 weeks ago. My body looks different in the mirror. Guess what? That's going to create a feedback loop that's going to incentivize you to stick to your program, to stick to your diet, to do what's necessary to make your belt even looser a couple weeks from now. And when you see that your effort is rewarded by what the mirror shows you, you realize that you can create your own dopamine, and it feels pretty damn good. The other experience that I've had, and I've worked with others to achieve, is making your first dollar online or making your first dollar as an entrepreneur. Because I guarantee that first dollar that you make online or as an entrepreneur feels about 100 times better than that first dollar that you made as somebody else's employee. So much so that, I remember a few years ago when I would make $50 from digital product sales and I get an email saying somebody bought my digital product. I got such a dopamine rush. It probably was the equivalent of making like $10,000 in asset markets, just because, you get that dopamine ping, you get that validation, you realize that somebody wants what you're putting out there. And so you have to realize that you have the opportunity as a self-sovereign man to make your own mark in the world, and that the world and your body will respond to your effort. Once you realize that people or your body will respond to your own effort, you become empowered. You have dominion, you have sovereignty, you have the ability to dictate your future, and that's empowering. And once you have the power, you further invest more effort, and you start to realize, I don't need these exogenous dopamine crutches that I've been reliant on for the last 3 years. You start to experiment self-sourcing more and more of your own dopamine, becoming independent from other people's control mechanisms that they built to enslave you or to at the very least profit off of you. And 5 years later, you're a completely different person than when you ever started your journey.
Yeah. I can speak to that. I remember it was like it was yesterday. I got out of the, corporate sales role that I was in my 20s and rolled the dice on an obscure wellness center at 29. I wanted to make sure that by the time I was 30, that I was going to be running my own business. And I had zero experience, not a single business class, not a single marketing class, zero, nada. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to open a flotation therapy center because I really like it and I think people need it. And that was in 2020. I never looked back. And there's been ups and downs. There's been some tricky financial times. There's been a lot of stress. There's been a lot of turmoil in my family. Like, it's not easy, but you're right. There is when the first customer came and paid $40 for a 1-hour flotation tank session in Seattle, my life changed. And I never want to go back. I'm not cut out to have a boss. And I think a lot of people who have bosses also think, man, I'm not cut out to have a boss. I don't feel right here. All of my hard-earned time, all of the time that I put into is padding the pockets of stakeholders and shareholders for this X company that I'm working for. I don't feel right here. And at the same time, they're not taking some of the steps that you've already laid out to change that paradigm, to take control of their life. but there's nothing like it.
When I had a job, I was paid fairly well as a tech employee, but I always felt like a child when I was dependent on somebody else to give me a paycheck. I always felt subordinated, literally, when I had to justify my salary doing annual or semi-annual performance reviews. And so I always felt like I wasn't a complete adult until I was able to earn money independent of a corporation. But I know my need for self-sovereignty is different than the average person. A lot of people can feel happy working in somebody else's organization. But if you can't, you can't, you've known you couldn't since you were in your early 20s, you got to rip the Band-Aid off. You have to realize that escaping the corporate prison is like escaping an actual prison. It's like Shawshank Redemption. You're not going to get out if you just follow the rules. You need to figure out how to cut a couple corners, how to start something on the side, how to dedicate all your free time to doing something independent of what your present company is paying you for. And you have to be patient enough because it's going to take probably at least a year to start making any sort of real money off of it. And that's if you're lucky. I just posted yesterday that I created my Twitter account 6 years ago to the day yesterday. And it took me 9 months before I even made my first dollar online. I wasn't creating it so I could make money very quickly. It just so happened that I built an audience and they were demanding, where they could learn more about how I was approaching my diet and how I was able to eat 3,000 to 4,000 calories of burgers, pizza, fried chicken, and tacos without counting calories, without going hungry, staying shredded year round. So I had to put out a digital product to explain it. And it wasn't 6, 7, 8 months after that until I started making actually close to replacement level income, where it became conceivable that, hey, maybe if I can build a track record of doing this a few quarters in a row, it's conceivable for me to leave my job. And so it took me over 2 years from when I started my social media accounts or started growing my social media accounts to where I actually had income where it made sense for me to focus on it full time. And most people can't make it 2 years. Most people can't make it 6 months or even 3 months. But I tell everybody that if you're going to approach anything, whether it's starting a new business, starting a new workout plan, making any sort of life change, you need to commit to 90 days because the first 90 days are the hardest. The first 90 days are where you're investing all of your effort. Your dopaminergic rewards are the most minimal because you don't have a framework. You don't have a foundation that you can build off of. You have no momentum, no recognition. Very difficult for you to even know that what you're doing is correct. And it's not until day 90, day 180, if you're doing well, that you start to get some sort of feedback that suggests that you're on the right track and you have more motivation to continue going on the path and maybe even investing more effort than you had been to that point. But you've got to get through the first 90 to 180 days because those suck. And there's nothing you can really do to make them not suck. You just got to put your head down and know that this is what you signed up for.
Yeah. Are you obsessive, Alex?
Yeah, I've been told I think that the type of person who is going to spend 4 hours after school at the weight room, on the track, in the batting cage as a 16 or 17-year-old trying to get a college scholarship, trying to become a Major League Baseball player, trying to get noticed by scouts. I think most people would describe that guy as obsessive. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that I can't be obsessive about everything. I have to figure out how to take as much off my plate as I'm putting on my plate. I have to play CFO and CRO to the business of Alex Feinberg, meaning I need to figure out where to cut my time expenditures with just as much effort as I need to figure out where to invest my time in other places. Because I only have 24 hours in a day. I need to sleep 6 to 7 of them. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to recover properly. And so I don't have infinite time. I can't be a David Goggins. I can't be a Jocko Willink. And guess what? You can't either. Nobody else can be a caricature of hard work. We all need to rest. We all need to recover. Sure, there's going to be sprints where we're busier than other times, but we all have time constraints around what we do. And so we need to be efficient. We need to be maniacally efficient about how we go through life, and having frameworks that force constraint upon us is one way that we can balance our time budget and effectively ensure that our time investment is generating yield so that 6 months from now, 12 months from now, we don't have to invest as much time to get the same reward as we do today across multiple activities, because new demands are always going to pop up. Your family might get bigger. Somebody might get hurt, might get in a car accident. There's always competition for time in your calendar. So you need to constantly be figuring out how you can play Jenga with your obligations and how you can get the same or better results with less and less effort.
Play Jenga with your obligations. I love that. Yeah, you've made a really good point, which is it's easier to stay fit than get fit. It's easier to sustain an income and finances that support you than it is to start. And once you get that flywheel going around your fitness, around your relationships, around your life, once you get some positive momentum, it does get easier. There will be bumps in the road, but it's easier to stay lean than it is to get lean. And I think that's hopefully that's, compelling for people to hear that, okay, the first 90 days are going to absolutely suck. I'm going to be tired. I'm going to be cranky. I'm going to doubt myself. I'm going to have fear of what's in my future. But once you get a little bit of momentum in your fitness, in your nutrition, in your own spiritual development, meditation, once you get going on that, then it's like, this isn't so bad. You're slowly conditioning yourself to sustain that new level of performance, that optimal performance. And that's different for everybody, right? That for you or me, whether you have kids or not kids, whether you've ever made $1 online or not, it's different for everybody, the scale. I just think it's an important point to make that you have to start sometime. And in 5 years or 10 years, you will have wished that you started 5 or 10 years earlier, because it's harder as you get older. It's harder as your life goes through these seasons, but momentum is a tremendous variable in your own personal development.
3 of the most important rules that apply to more than simply physics are the rule of inertia, the rule of compounding, and the rule of momentum. And so if you look at how your life is situated, say you're a 35-year-old man, you're good at some things, you're bad at some things. Chances are the way you're neurologically wired will reinforce the things that you're good at and reinforce the things that you're bad at. So maybe you're a multimillionaire, but you're 10 pounds overweight at 35. Well, guess what? By the time you're 45, maybe you're going to be a decamillionaire, but you're going to be 25 pounds overweight. And the likelihood that you die from a heart attack or have a heart attack exceeds what the average man's is, which is over 25% of men will have heart attacks by the time they're 65 years old. So maybe you're really good at making money, but you're not very good at having longevity. Something about how you're wired has incentivized you to continue to chase more money at the expense of your health. Maybe the reverse is true. You're really healthy, but you're not very good at making money. Well, chances are that you're going to continue to struggle. You're going to continue to work too hard for too little. But your health is going to go in a generally good direction because you laid a good foundation. How you are naturally oriented will compound over time. And, one of the things that I tell people when it comes to investing is you either need to put your money into assets that appreciate over time significantly, or your body. Because if you don't invest in your body, it's going to depreciate over time. If you feel a little bit achy by the time you're 40, you're going to feel a lot achy by the time you're 50, and you're going to be nearly immobile by the time you're 60. Good luck staying healthy if you can't move 20 years from now. And so you have to realize that everything in your life is headed in a compounding direction. And the easiest way to make progress and get results that are so good that people cannot conceive how you're actually the age you say you are, or you attain the net worth that you have, is by compounding in the positive direction at a reasonable rate year after year after year after year, which can only come when you have systems in place that allow you to improve with the same level of effort as collecting interest, right? You don't actually have to put in a ton of effort for your brokerage account to compound if you have investments in the right area and enough of a capital base. You just wait, you sleep, you make money while you sleep. If your body, if your training plan, if your diet, if your lifestyle is healthy, you're going to make health improvements simply by continuing to follow a plan, continuing to build on the framework that you've put in place. So the number one rule is get your frameworks right as early as possible so your life can compound in the direction that you want it to for many years in the future.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think there's an Einstein quote somewhere around, the universal law of compounding, which, yeah, it's so true. And I think that we overlook it, and sometimes we overlook it until we're older and we're like, I should have been saving 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I should have been investing either in my health or in my finances. Super fascinating. One thing that has become clear to me, because I coach high level guys too, it's easy to add stuff in, right? Supplements, you know, habits. You could read 1,000 books and not activate on a single one of them or integrate it into your life. It's easy to consume content and to have good ideas and to build and build and build. But one thing that I think a lot of people miss is the addition by subtraction, the
Mhm.
detoxification protocols or fasting. And I want to talk to you about dry fasting maybe later, but you got to clear the clutter out in order to let go of what no longer serves you so that you can move forward in your life. And so for a lot of people, they think, okay, I'm going to listen to a podcast every day. I'm going to consume Goggins and Rogan and Jocko. And there's a plethora of information that's really insightful. You could read 1,000 books, but if you don't declutter your day, your home, your life, the content you consume, then you're just adding shit to this rain barrel that eventually is going to overflow. And so I want to hear some of your thoughts on maybe some practical applications of how to add by subtracting.
So I'm going to tell you this one thing, write it down. I'm giving you full license to use it with your clients. For smart people, for type A individuals, the most beneficial way that they can learn in their 30s, 40s, and beyond is by being able to unlearn. The most beneficial learning is unlearning, is being able to toss out archaic or antiquated mental models that they built their existing life around. That is very often the biggest obstacle that people have for improving, for people getting great, is they're unable to discard the adjustments that they made to go from beginner to intermediate in order to go from intermediate to advanced. But the reality is the rules change when you go from beginner to intermediate and go from intermediate to advanced. Oftentimes, you go from beginner to intermediate by never missing a day, by being insanely disciplined, by ignoring fun things, ignoring restorative or recuperative practices, so that you can simply make yourself into a mechanistic robot that produces content every day, that gets 50 phone calls out every morning, that basically does a high volume of work. But what you need to do in order to get to that next level is realize that you're probably stuck where you are because your intuition has you repeating activities that aren't going to yield you exponential results. And so you need to become comfortable paring back your activity, or be comfortable learning frameworks that will force you to pare back your activity and pursue a smaller number but higher yielding activities in the future. One thing that you can do that a lot of type A's are hesitant to do is observe lazy, successful people. You have to learn from lazy, successful people, because you cannot be successful if you're lazy unless you got insanely lucky. But typically, insane luck isn't the only explanatory factor when trying to tell, okay, why is this person successful? Usually lazy, successful people have figured out some sort of cheat code, whether they can articulate it to you or you simply need to figure it out by observing them. Usually lazy, successful people, if they're not criminals, if they're not cheating, they've usually figured something out that is the key to you making exponential improvements, but it's going to force you to stop investing the many hours per week that you've been investing, making sure that your old antiquated framework persists. Again, the most important form of learning is unlearning. I guarantee that you're holding a few ideas in your head right now that simply don't serve you, that maybe serve the 2017 version of you. And the quicker you can toss those aside and formulate new mental models around the 2025 environment, the quicker you have to start seeing that exponential uptick in your productivity and your happiness that you know is in your future.
What are some examples of unlearning in any given category that you really like and stand out?
Yeah. So when I first got into sales, I am a very mathematical, very logical person. And so I assumed that the colleagues that I had who would speak a little bit softer, who weren't very good with math or necessarily logic problems, their IQs weren't as high as, say, financial analysts who I was friends with. I didn't think that they were smart. I thought that if I could simply communicate more logically than them, or if I could be more of a robot than my peers at Google, then I could outsell them. It wasn't until I was in my role for 6 or 9 months where I realized, no. These people are actually smart in a way that I haven't calculated properly. They're much better at understanding people's emotions. And because they can understand the emotions of their buyers, they know who's bullshitting them. They know who's wasting their time, and they know who they can invest in that is ultimately going to culminate in a larger deal that they can upsell. And so once you realize that there's multiple forms of intelligence that you may not have, then you start focusing in on individuals who may not have the form of intelligence that you have already considered to be important, but they have the key to you formulating the types of intelligence that you need to have in order to be successful in your next venture. So for me, it was learning how to read people, learning that their eyes, their tone, their body language all gave me free information about what they were thinking. And if I wasn't picking up on this free information, I was essentially flying blind. And I think a lot of people who are computationally intelligent, who may be very good logically, they're missing some of these cues that would, in fact, make their lives professionally and also make their lives personally substantially more impactful, substantially more effective. But they've gone through their entire lives not realizing that there's so much free information at their disposal that they're just not properly ingesting it. They're not properly incorporating it into their decision-making. And once they do, lo and behold, their decisions become 10 times more impactful.
Well said. That's the distinction between an ENTJ and an ENFJ, like the thinking versus feeling. Watched your Zuby. You guys were talking a little bit about Myers-Briggs. I'm an ENFJ, so maybe not as bright, maybe not as calculated or analytical, big time feeler. I got to work really hard to be organized, but my emotional intelligence is pretty high, and it's gotten me lots of incredible opportunities. And I think it makes me a good podcast host too, is because I'm feeling into the things that you're saying. That's why I asked you, like, are you obsessive? Because I'm getting this sense, and think this goes for everybody, is if you are a certain way and you're kind of stuck in that archetype, and it's gotten you pretty far. It's gotten you, a lot of money or a lot of prestige, or it's gotten you, to a life that you like, but you think that there's something missing. Explore the flip side of the coin if you're brave enough, and explore the third side, the ridge of the coin, if you're really balls out, and understand that there are some things that you don't know, and be willing to learn those things. One of the things that I talk to a lot about with my clients, who are mostly executives, is you've had a good run applying the skills and intelligence that you have. You have all these arrows in your quiver, and they've worked for you. But you've hired me, you're paying me to help you to add new arrows to that quiver. Doesn't mean that you have to throw away all of those arrows that have gotten you this far. You just got to find some different types of arrows to put in there. And it doesn't undermine what's already worked for you. That's all there. That's a foundational sort of aspect of how you perform in every aspect of your life. That doesn't go away. By increasing your emotional intelligence, it's not going to make you soft. By developing the creative aspects of yourself, it's not going to take the place of your analytical mind. It's just going to expand your consciousness and expand your awareness. I always look to a portion of my coaching, for some people, does include work with psychedelics. There's themes here, right? The float tank centers, the work with psychedelics, to sort of expand your consciousness in a new way, to learn something about yourself in an altered state of consciousness, in a psychedelic state, done properly. And then you learn, like, I'm maybe not paying attention to my wife as much as I should be. I'm too hard on myself, and I need to maybe let that go in order for me to continue to evolve as a person. And so I think that's a really great point, that you've done great and you're happy with where you are, but you're not quite where you want to be, is to add new skills, let go or soften some of these other skills that are kind of driving the bus and churning you out, maybe causing burnout or undermining your fitness. Just add some other things in and let some stuff go. Just kind of pause on some of that stuff, and you'll be amazed. I mean, sometimes it happens in a week or two, where a new communication strategy at work that's maybe softer, maybe it's a more feminine way of communicating than what you are maybe previously doing. People look at you differently. They respond to you differently. You're using different language. You're expanding your scope. You're expanding your sense of self. And we should be curious about this stuff, right? Like, what else are we doing? This is the only show in town. We might as well continue to improve for our entire life. This is my soapbox moment there.
Well, yeah, I think that highly successful people at times in their lives are going to over-index on execution. And when you're executing, if you want to execute, work in a place with low ceilings and not a great view, because that's going to be the easiest place for you to just buckle down and get work done. But guess what? There's a downside to working in a building with low ceilings and limited view. Your ability to see new horizons or find new targets is going to be limited. And so the more high execution focused individuals can change their environment, to get outside, to be in high ceiling work areas, to go on vacation, to do the things that aren't intuitive to them, the more they can expand their mind and see things that might be obvious to somebody who wasn't in their shoes 24/7, 365. But unfortunately, you are in your own shoes every minute of every day. And you need to do something that gets you out of there, whether it is taking 2 weeks off, even though that makes you feel very uncomfortable. Maybe it means working 30 miles from your office, even though that feels very foreign and it feels like a waste of time or something that's simply bringing you out of your element for no particular reason. Maybe it means using psychedelics. Maybe it means using some sort of, mild or even more than mild mind-altering substance. I found back when I did use medicinal marijuana reasonably regularly, haven't done that in a while now, but back when I did use it reasonably regularly, I always thought that if you gave me a math test, I wouldn't perform as well on it, but I am able to think from a different vantage point than I normally do when this is not in my system. And so simply being able to look at a problem from multiple vantage points is beneficial, particularly for intensely oriented people who are simply focused on getting all their tasks done so they can wake up tomorrow and do the same thing.
Well said. Well said. What if you had to point at 3 books that have really shaped the way that you think about performance, what might those be?
And this is a hard question to say because I spend a lot of my time in the real world. And so a lot of the ideas that I have, people think are, well, this is that you must have gotten this from this author. I remember this guy, this Stoic philosopher wrote this. And the reality is a lot of times I try to build my frameworks, my mental models around what I'm seeing. And I try to make sure that my real world experience validates them. And if it doesn't, then I just discard the mental model, redo the scaffolding and try to rebuild it. And so, I don't know that I can say that there's 3 books that all of my frameworks and success are highly dependent on. I can say that there are templates that are free that other people can look to make their lives better. The older I get, the more that I think the Bible is one that people are given a free guide that makes your life better. And even if it doesn't make sense, the people who believe that what is written in it is true live better. They have lower incidences of depression. They have lower dependency on pharmaceutical interventions. They are more likely to have a happy, healthy family. So there are stories in this free book that are as guaranteed as guarantees can come to make your life better if you can simply overcome the training that our educational system has passed on to you to make you skeptical of things that might not make logical or scientific sense. So that's number 1. Number 2, everybody says How to Win Friends and Influence People is a good book. One of my mentors suggested that to me when I was younger. I think it is good to know people, to know people's names, to say thank you when you meet it, to be friends with as many people as you can, because I just got done podcasting with one of my friends back when I worked in Hong Kong. He was a first 50 employee at Uber, made generational wealth. And the only reason he got that opportunity was because he was friends with the secretary of a client that he had back when he was an analyst at Goldman Sachs. It wasn't because he was plotting and trying to be friends with the most powerful brokers in Silicon Valley or Wall Street. It was because he had genuine relationships with genuine people and kept in touch with them. And so being able to be friends with people and know their names and remember their families and genuinely be interested in what's new with them will unveil more opportunities to you than you can nefariously plot your way around simply by being in touch or being a sycophant to powerful people. So I think those are two good books that anybody would benefit from basing, a little bit more on their life around. But I can say that it was my life experience that taught me that these books were very beneficial rather than the books that steered me towards the life experience that I've developed to date.
Yeah, those are good ones. Those are good ones. I'll let you off the hook and not giving me a third. I know you've got one in there, but I'll let you. I'll give you a pass.
Okay, some Seneca. Maybe I was reading some Seneca a couple of months ago, thanks to the suggestion of one of my online mentors, Mr. Adam Townsend. I think Stoic philosophy is pretty good too. Teaching you that life is finite and trying to basically minimize your reliance on the opinions of other people is a good way to live. It might make it hard for you to be motivated to do what you're presently doing, which is probably a sign that maybe you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. But there's wisdom in that. And so, I think, there isn't some like mysterious suggestion of a book that you've never heard of. They're classics for a reason. And, I think successful religions have coalesced around important tenets for a reason. And it's because there's something about the human psyche that makes these books work well with us.
Yeah, that's for sure. Universal wisdom never goes out of style. So I have another podcast. It's called Athlete Complete. It's with former MLB, now former, he just retired, James Paxton, left-handed pitcher, Big Maple, played for the Dodgers, Bo Sox, Yankees, Mariners, and a couple of other former MLS athletes, friends of mine. And we talk about youth sports and how formative youth sports are on our identity, on how we receive love, our personal value, teamsmanship, hard work, et cetera, et cetera. It's interesting to me, and this is obvious to you and I who played sports. So I played through college soccer, played semi-pro for a year, and now am an ambitious Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. And I also coach my kids in their sports. What is it about youth sports that leads to the formulation of mentality that then pays off? I like hanging out with athletes. We speak the same language. We have the same, I think we have the same similar types of tenacity and the same types of baggage and shit associated with our worth being whether or not we can throw a ball fast or kick the ball into the back of a net. Maybe talk a little bit about the value that youth sports had in your life.
Sports teach you that there's winning and that there's losing. And as obvious as this sounds to an athlete, most people are not actually brought up to learn that this was a bad outcome and it's your fault. And so sports train you to understand the polarity of outcomes and the fact that you are responsible for it. And if you don't do anything about it, that outcome is going to repeat. And I think on the bad side, people probably have some degree of trauma from some abrasive coach that drilled into them faults that were not necessarily theirs. But the plus side of it is you are going to be substantially more accountable when you have years of experience being told that this loss is all your fault. It's a lot easier to trust somebody to run a business unit when he is familiar with the concept of we either won this week or we lost this week. And no matter what happens, your neck is the neck that I'm going to strangle if it doesn't go the way I want it to. So figure it out. A lot of sports are that, particularly hand-eye sports and high pressure situations where if you don't have your mind right, you're going to be the weak link. You're going to embarrass yourself in front of a lot of people, in front of your best friends who are often your teammates. And so you got to have your shit together, and you also need to be focused fully on executing towards the outcome that you want. Most people don't have that. Most people are told, hey, it's okay, and if you're told that it's okay, you're going to figure out a way to jump from lily pad to lily pad. And maybe that's going to suit you. Maybe you're going to be happier. Maybe you're going to be able to endure certain of life's events better than the hard-nosed athlete. But you're probably not going to have the same experience grappling with adversity. Sports force you to be able to overcome adversity because they force you to come to terms with the reality that you lost. And
Mm.
particularly with this generation, when you're constantly told that you have value, when you're constantly told that you're a snowflake, you're going to avoid the hard truths that are proven to you when the scoreboard doesn't go your way. The downside is obviously if you're over invested in certain losses, those can be harder for you to overcome too. But we can cross that bridge when it comes as an ex-athlete. There's a lot of mental work that you can do to overcome past trauma of losses and excessive response to certain stressors. But at the very least, training people to be competitive is immensely helpful. The question's always in the dosage. Some people might benefit from being a little bit more relaxed, but most people would benefit from having a little bit more structure around how they approach their business. Now, if you're a type A individual and you played sports growing up, my advice to you might be the reverse. Maybe you need to unlearn some of those lessons that youth sports and competitive sports taught you. Again, it really depends on what you're naturally good at, how you're naturally oriented. Most likely, if you're already doing fairly well in life, the way you get to the next level is by reeling back some of the framework, some of the foundation that you've built your present life around, as uncomfortable as that might be, because that's where your next 10x lies. It's in reverse engineering why certain people who aren't as intense as you, who aren't wired exactly the way you are more successful. And once you can figure out the answer to that question, then you can make the necessary changes to get to that next level in your life.
I love that. I love that. That's a concept that I'm going to explore more so after this conversation around it's just part of my default mode network of who I am and how I see myself that I need to let go of, or that I maybe would benefit from letting go of, so that I can go to that next level. Because I'm working on 1,000 things. Like when you were like, make a bunch of calls, coaching clients, podcast production, like every single day of my life is packed, and I've set it up that way. And that gets me into a groove. It gets me into you got to do this, got to do this, got to do this. And so I think for me, and I think for a lot of people listening to this right now who are, signed up for that next CrossFit competition, or who are, training for a marathon and looking for an edge, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you should sleep more. Maybe you should have more rest days. Maybe you shouldn't cling so tightly to the things that you think are going to help you. Maybe it's the opposite. And I think that that's a really profound idea that people can toy with. The thing is that it takes time. It takes time and introspection, and or a skilled coach to help you recognize what the fuck you're doing and why it's not working for you. I think a lot of people, especially type A go-getter types, they feel like they can figure out what it is that's stopping them, but they're sniffing their own farts and drinking their own Kool-Aid, and they don't know. They don't know that they're all fucked up. They don't know that their attention is not where it maybe should be. And working with someone who is very skilled, who has done some of the things that you want to do, who has amassed a bunch of experience and a bunch of wisdom, can say, hey, you've got spinach in your teeth. Like you're messing up here, here, and here. This is unserving you. You need to rethink this. I think that a lot of people would really, really benefit from working with a coach, a skilled coach like yourself or myself, or a mentor who can, really objectively take a look at what's going on and help you kind of course correct. Because if you don't, you're just going to keep digging that groove deeper and deeper and deeper. And then you're going to wake up at 60 and go, what the fuck have I been doing? Why had that taken so much of my attention? Like, why is my health so bad? Why can't I lose this 20 pounds, which is probably more like 40 pounds that I want? It's like, well, because you're in a bubble, man. You're bullshitting yourself every day.
Yeah. You need to carefully vet and curate the information that is passing the barrier of your eyes and your ears into your brain. And so if you get good information in your mind and you act on it, you're going to be immensely more successful than if you get bad information in your mind and you act on that. Unfortunately, you only have two eyes. You can only see things from one vantage point. And so finding somebody who you get along with, who can see things the way you see them, but also sees things in a different way from how you see them, that's very often the key to taking that 3x, 5x, 10x leap that you struggled to attain over the last 3 or 4 years because you know what you can tell yourself to do. You don't know what somebody smarter than you or with a different vantage point is going to tell you to do because you've never had that vantage point. You don't have that person's experience. So if you're looking for somebody who can tell you something that you already know, chances are that's not going to serve you, right? Because it's just going to reinforce the idea that you already have. You need to find somebody who tells you some things that you already know, but challenges you on some ideas that you assume are true but aren't. Because again, the most important form of learning is unlearning.
Yeah. What are your opinions on therapy?
It depends who the therapist is. It's like, what's your opinion of doctors? Depends who the doctor is, right? I think that a lot of therapy is, so the most common therapists aren't even called therapists. They're called salesmen because salesmen they're going to naturally need to learn how to empathize with their clients, and their clients will continue to buy from them because they can go to them with their problems. Would you go to a physical therapist if you went every week for 4 years and your condition didn't get better? Probably not. And so if you're going to a therapist every week for 4 years and your condition isn't getting better, there's something that therapist is offering you, and there's something that therapist isn't giving you that keeps you stuck in that loop where you're not getting better. So therapy shouldn't be a venting session. Therapy should be like training, where you're going in there, you're trying to diagnose an issue that you have, and you're working to correct it. If you're not getting better, you're working with the wrong therapist. I would say, just like any other field, there are people who are truly elite. If you can find somebody who's truly elite, that person is going to be a 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 type therapist. That guy's worth every dollar you pay him. But if you go, just with some guy that you find off of Yelp, some guy that you find off of Google, well, there's a good chance that person isn't going to give you the return on your investment, both time and money, that you were hoping he would. So you need to be careful with your vetting. You need to be careful who you let in. But if you find a good one, that person's worth his weight in gold.
Yeah, I've yet to meet that therapist. That's not true. I know of a couple of EMDR therapists. Are you familiar with this paradigm, EMDR? Yeah.
Yep.
I've met a lot of therapists. Many of my coaching clients work with a therapist and get nowhere because they're not forward thinking. It's all rear view mirror. This is why you're like this. This is why you're like this. How does that feel? And never any forward progress, which is why they hire a coach, because it's like, okay, what's the plan? Where are we going? Like forward.
Right.
EMDR is a little different because it does help rapidly transform and process trauma in a really practical way that's also physiological, that helps people a lot. But like, man, all this BetterHelp, I got contacted by BetterHelp a while ago when they were looking at sponsoring podcasts, and the thought of hiring a complete stranger under this model to just spill your guts and just open yourself up to someone who is not there to help you, they're there to capitalize on your fuckery, is just, I think it's just a really nefarious proposition that I think a lot of people don't really think about. But I really like the way that you compared it to doctors, because I know one good doctor, I know one good therapist, and I know one good doctor. I know an EMDR therapist. She's great, and I also have our family doctor, who's a naturopathic doctor, who is also great. That's about it. But I like the way that you compared those.
Yeah, if you're learning from a mass market educational platform like medical school, chances are you're kind of like not as good as Perplexity or Google. You're kind of like a human version of what you can Google. But if you are good at connecting dots on your own and can tie your years of experience with what somebody can easily Google, at that point you could be advanced from what your peers are. When it comes to therapy, you go to a physical therapist because they can help diagnose your problem and also help put you through something that is increasingly challenging until your injury is as healed as it can be. And I think a lot of therapy, as you mentioned, is retrospective. It's around problem diagnosis and about you being comfortable with the problem, with the injury that you had many years ago. Unfortunately, if it doesn't require that you do challenging things and put yourself in increasingly stressful situations to test the rehabilitation that you have been doing during the months of therapy, it's not actually useful. The purpose of therapy should be to get you out of therapy, not to keep you in therapy.
Right. Right. Yeah. It certainly shouldn't be the purpose to diagnose and prescribe some sort of SSRI that's going to fuck up your internal organs and make you dull. Yeah.
Mhm.
What, Alex, what's your life purpose?
Oh, that's a great question. That changes every year of my life. It changes because I was so committed to just fleeing the plantation in my 20s and 30s. That was my life purpose, when I was a younger man. As I've gotten older, as I have, people who I love and care about in my life, a soon to be 6-year old in my life, um, it starts to be more about living through other people and, making the lessons that you learn, not just about how can I help me, but how can I help others? Because ultimately, at some point we'll be dust in the wind. I saw a Mike Tyson interview last night where he was telling that to a child, but it's true. At some point we're going to be dust in the wind. And how we're going to live on is how other people remember us and the ideas that we share with them and the ideas that we have that we share with them that they share with others. And so, the more we can focus on, hey, you know what? I've gone through a challenging time, ideally, so people who I love and care about don't. The more we can share ideas, hey, you know what? This framework worked for me. This is why this alternative framework is a little bit of a delusion. There's a false god there that most people are inclined to follow, but don't go in that path. I think that is, an obvious progression for my life's purpose. But whatever I tell you today is going to be different from what I tell you 5 or 10 years from now, because that's how people grow.
Mm. Just be letting that one breathe a little bit. What's one idea that you feel that's outside of the stuff that we've already talked about? What's one idea that you feel very, very strongly about that most people don't?
That's a very good question. Wow. A lot of the world is designed to, your life will decay unless you put a lot of work into making it go in the direction that you want it to. And that requires you to rethink a lot of the things that you have held near and dear to you. Do a lot of work that is uncomfortable for you in the beginning so that you can become a new person that you haven't been. And so you need to reinvent yourself multiple times over in order to be the man that you want to be. And that metamorphosis is so uncomfortable that most people never do it.
Mm. I agree with that completely. Yeah, if you're not changing, there's that little meme where it's a caterpillar talking to a butterfly, and the caterpillar says to the butterfly, "Dude, you've changed." And the butterfly says, "Dude, we're supposed to." It's like it's one of two things that we can predict that we know are coming, or
Uh-huh.
changes and death. Like those are the two
Uh-huh.
things. And if you cling too tightly to the things that you're comfortable about, you're missing the point, man. Alex, this has been such a cool conversation, man. I feel like we could go for another 4 hours. I only got to like one or two of the questions that I had. If you're up for it, I'd love to have you back and we can riff again.
Let's do it, man. I'm super excited to continue talking on these things. I think my mental stamina can go about 60 minutes too before my ideas start to degrade. So, down to put a pause in this and we can pick it up, when we're both ready and recharged.
Love it. Before we land this plane, I'm going to ask a fill in the blank question. But before I ask that question, where can people learn more? Where can they follow along? Where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, Alex Feinberg one, Feinberg one, Alex Feinberg one on X, formerly Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube as well. Follow me on LinkedIn too. A lot of my content, all my video content's coming out on there. Right now, my DMs are open. So if you have questions specific to you, you can ask them to me and a decent chance I reply. You can also go to my website, feinbergsystems.com. You can sign up for some freebies, get looped in, eventually get my email address from that. So I'm accessible right now. At some point, maybe in a year or two, it's not going to be so easy. But right now, you can take advantage of access to me while you have it. If you have hard problems, you're a type A individual, we can work well together. I specialize in people who are as competitive as I was when I was an elite athlete, and figuring out how to reduce stress and make life simpler so that we can take it to the next level using new frameworks that aren't intuitive to us right now, but will be as we learn more.
One of the I just occurred to me now. One of the reasons why I think I really like you and like what you're saying is that you're a generalist. And I hope that you take that as a compliment, because I too am a generalist. I know a whole bunch. I'm fairly deep, but I'm really wide. And my coaching offering is similar, and it sounds like you're that same way. And the thing is, it's hard to penetrate to get people's attention when you're a generalist, because you're not living and dying on this one thing. It's like, oh man, this is my vaccines. That's my thing. And I'm just going to hammer that, and I'm going to polarize people and get that attention. Right. So it just sort of resonated with me. And I think that I think it's an asset. And so it's refreshing to see someone else who is a generalist, who knows a whole bunch about a whole bunch, providing these keys and wisdoms. So here's the fill in the blank question. This can be based on just about anything. I've asked this hundreds of times. You can elaborate as much or as little as you want, but please fill in the blank. Everyone would benefit from knowing
that doing a little bit less of what feels most intuitive to them is probably the key to them reaching the next level.
Mwah. Love it. Alex Feinberg, thank you so much for joining me today on the Optimal Performance Podcast.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to round 2.